Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined by my other amazing host.
Hi, it's me, Magic, also known as May.
And we have a very special guest on this particular episode.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I don't have a cool name either. I could be just Nate, maybe. I don't know.
It's Mr. Black.
Mr. Black.
You can't be Mr. Black. He's on another job. You got to be Mr. Pink.
Ah, nice reference there. Tarantino.
So we've got Nathan on board here because he has designed and cloned an absolutely amazing cube that our group has enjoyed, and I'm hoping May gets to enjoy in the very near future, that we intend to feature at the UberCube event. And I'm sure the audience loves hearing about this every episode, as I promised, up until April the 27th. So here we go. Here's the spiel. UberCube event. It's going to be at the Gathering Place, April 27th from 9 a.m. till 9:30 p.m., at which point there's going to be a kickoff party for some karaoke. 64 players, 8 cubes. The top 8 will compete in my Power Cube for the final trophy. I actually have the prize structure available. If you're interested and you've listened to this episode, I will share it with you. It's phenomenal based on 64. In addition to the sign up, which will be included in the show notes, it's $55, which includes a drink ticket because, as May has stated, it's a bar. Bars are fun. Bars and Magic just go really well. Like, you know, whenever during this event, if you see me like the hustle and bustle and I'm watching, I wouldn't mind busting out some bar cube during this. Just sit up at let them kind of have their way during the competition. If we can get you here, that's what you and I'll be doing. Some big spender over in the corner, just having a drink.
Hell yeah.
That sounds amazing, actually. Let's do that. But we've decided, based on the cubes that we have in our circle, Nathan has the almost legendary cube, which we're going to talk about during this episode, which is going to be featured during the UberCube event. And we play it pretty regularly. Absolutely have fallen in love with this cube. Really digs into the mind of an EDH player, but turns it to cube. And I'm fascinated by it.
Thank you. It's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I cloned it, but the amount of it that actually exists from the original is probably about maybe 40% left of the original cube. So it's kind of developing into something of mine. I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a great starting point. We're going to talk about that more as the episode progresses, but we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. We're going to enjoy our libations of the show. Let's start out with our guest. What are you having today?
I am having a Terrapin beer, and it's the Luau Passion Fruit Orange Guava IPA.
It sounds delicious. How about yourself, May?
I am having just another Cabernet of Kirkland.
Nice. The Costco Sauvignon.
Exactly.
Cabernets are awesome.
And I am having a
I like me some cheap wine.
Yeah, you know what? Most of those get 90s. Whenever you really search around, those cheap wines are the ones that are unknown. I mean, people, just going off topic, but there was a study done not too long ago that most box wines are actually better than bottled wines. And people think it's a faux pas to purchase that, but it preserves the wine better. And they get 90s and gold medals all the time. But I am having a Sweetwater 420 strain G13 IPA. It's got this really overwhelming hemp smell, so everybody prepares themselves. Let's crack this open. Let's get to the topic. All right, Nathan, you're going to be on deck. So May's going to be throwing curveballs at you. I'm going to be throwing curveballs at you. We've got a nice little kind of script for you to help you think about these things. But May, would you mind taking off the first kind of the point, please?
So, when it comes to cloning cubes, I think that is something that we should all encourage a bit more from our community, and I think that it is also just a great starting point. Only 30% of what you've initially cloned has been left over, huh? So what are some of the major changes that you made from the cube that you cloned from? And what was the cube you cloned from?
So the cube I cloned was called Legendary Cube. And, very simple. I wish I could tell you who created the original one. I had it on my original page, but I don't have it right now. So basically, it was made about 3 years ago. So there was a lot of cards that had been made in 3 years, as you can tell. So a lot of what I removed were cards that were way unbalanced power-wise. Kind of learned the hard way with Umezawa's Jite, as we had a conversation on that one. And then cards that were they just been outmoded. They just weren't good anymore. So a lot of it's just like really fun legends that people like to play both in the forbidden word commander. Also, just ones that work really well just by themselves. Like, I think it was your very first one where you talked about armies in a can.
Right.
And I love having legends that have that ability. Just by themselves, they create a bunch of creatures, or they do a lot of fun things. And so that was kind of where I started with it. And then Lord of the Rings came out, and just all these sets that had so many legends, and everybody's pushing Commander. So every time a set comes out, I'm always like, oh man, they want more legends and things that help legends. So that's been really helpful.
So when you keep talking about legends, is that a core foundation of the cube? Do you have rules or restrictions? Can you tell the audience about that?
Yes. Yeah. So the original name, like I said, was Legendary Cube. I decided to go with, instead of having every single creature be legendary, I wanted to make sure that everything affected legends in some way, or historic permanence. So for the most part, about 95% of the creatures in there are legendary, but there's a few that just help with historic cards. A lot of legendary artifacts, a lot of legendary enchantments like sagas, some legendary lands, and they're in there. But I mean, I didn't put things in there like Tellurian Academy or things that are just way overbalanced. But yeah, it was, and then Planeswalkers was an addition that Anthony had mentioned. He had said he really thought Planeswalkers would fit in there, and I originally was like, we often called them the Fogs. So I was like, I don't know if I want to put Fogs in here. But then as we talked about it more, I kind of realized that Planeswalkers do have a good, strong place both in Commander and in Cube if you have them in the right positions. So
Nathan is, by virtue, a Commander player at heart, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's just what he chases for his goals. So finding a cube like this, because he was one of the last. We've had a few holdouts in our group. I want to play Commander individuals. It just so happens that he came across this cube which is amazing, that fit that niche, right? May, do you have something to add to that?
I was just going to mention that it seems like the person that you cloned from was Ryan's Legendary Cube.
Yes.
Also known by Inthel on Cube Cobra.
Awesome.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for finding that. So. Yeah, thank you for looking
Very cool. Yeah, shout out to Ryan too, by the way. The difference in the gameplays is Ryan's cube was absolutely amazing, but when we sat down to play, every play group has an expectation, right? They're not all created equally. You got certain types of players. We talked about this in our psychographics episode. We went through and talked about players that expect certain things. In our case, we've got a lot of Jennies, Johnnies, and all the above, right? We've got Vorthos players. We have the whole suite of individual personalities. So whenever he presented this cube, the original iteration that we had played, while it was fantastic, it felt like a haymaker driven. Like whatever card sticks wins the game was kind of what was happening a lot. If you could get your legend to stay on the board, that legend would take over the game, which is fine. But the dynamics of the cube, since he's been making additions and cuts, I feel it's got a lot more pizzazz to it, a lot more spark, right? They don't feel so... The lines of plays in our circumstance don't feel so linear, right? It's not haymaker driven anymore. Complexity has been ratcheted up pretty hard through his cuts and his design. And I want to go back to your point, May, when you said it is a great place to start, right? Like you take an idea and you can make it your own. It doesn't, what may work in one group may not work in another because play styles and expectations of players, etc. But it's interesting that he took one and saw that as a foundational piece and was able to slice and dice from it. So,
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, and I do like Commander for those big plays. And I think you guys were talking about the Live the Dream Cube and how there's some similarities. And I'm very flattered by that because for one thing, that's a professional. And I've been playing Magic for, 30 years. How long has it been around? I've been playing for almost the whole time. And I really like the idea of these big plays that people talk about afterwards. Those are the best stories. Somebody's like, well, I was almost dead and he left himself open and I attacked with this sort of small creature and he wasn't paying attention. I berserked it and he's dead. And then it was like this amazing story that they can just keep telling and they tell other people about it. And so I really like that idea of just giant plays, just things that could be exciting that you talk about afterwards.
If I can pull up a specific example of this, is like how you have living death in your cube, while in the base cube that you cloned from, it does not have living death.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was an addition that he and I talked about. That's that level of dynamics where we wanted to. This is all of it. What I like about what Nathan did here is he took the feedback. He does the same thing that we all do, right? Like when he presented said cube on the first day, we're like, this thing here doesn't work that well. But over time, it started processing and taking it better, and he made changes based on these ideas. We literally went through the list. We didn't want to adulterate it too much. We just wanted to make it more robust, is the word I'm looking for. Is that fair?
Yeah, and encouraging interaction. Things like the hexproof problem or indestructible problem. There weren't very many cards in there that did that, but you have to have answers, because that's the most frustrating thing in a game, is if you're like, okay, well, I wasn't prepared for what the opponent brought to me. Like, I have no way to deal with anything. And then you get complaining about the cube. You complain to the people. You're saying you didn't do this right, or this card needs to be removed, when there really were answers in there, but maybe they just weren't enough. And they're just like that, those talks that we could have where we're like, okay, well, this is the proper way to do this. It's funny because when you create something like this, and I'm sure you guys both feel the same way, the first time people start telling you, hey, I don't really, this needs to change, or this needs to, you get defensive. You kind of go there and go, oh man, I thought I was doing a pretty good job. I had designed an enchantment cube a while back, but never actually made it, because as soon as I threw it out there, the world was like, no, there was just not enough. There was just too much enchantments and not enough other stuff. And everybody was just like, well, if you start this all over, I was like, this took me forever to design this. So the idea of cloning a cube kind of came up from that, where I was like, okay, well, what else do I like other than enchantments? And Christian made an amazing enchantment cube that I really enjoy. But I said, I really like legends. I really like the idea of this legendary concept. And of course, there's that line from How I Met Your Mother with a legendary. So I thought, like, almost legendary. And I also like the idea of, like, it's almost legendary. It's not quite, it's there, but not quite. Just a way to kind of like jokingly say it's not as strong as power. It's almost legendary.
Yeah. So from a person that's played this cube over and over again, what was interesting is the first curator, you said Brian in this case, had designed the cube. And as Nathan's doing the cuts, so the Edward Scissorhands that we've kind of joked about before, right? To make the cube their own. That's what you do, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people clone the Fey cube all the time, but then maybe they want to change that apparatus into something that tunes best for their environment. We could even, that's kind of a side note, but it's important. Like, Christian's kind of reached out to you, asking you, like, about the Fey cube. He wants to violate the budget rule, right? And that's a restriction that you have as a curator. But it's still flattering because it's your cube. He just wants to kind of minorly change that. That goes back to what you said is a foundation here. Cloning a cube is a great place to start, right?
Mm-hmm. And especially with like the budget thing, the main reason that I have it set to a lower budget is that way when people clone it or whatever, then they can be like, I want to upgrade it with these more expensive cards. A lot more workable room from that base.
Yeah, and I love that. That's a great foundation. Another card, he kind of alluded to this before, and this is important to talk about, with the residuals, and that's what I'm going to refer to. When you clone a cube, you always get the thumbprint or the fingerprint of the curator before you, right? And it's yours to change, right? Don't feel like you can't change it. Don't feel like May, in the case of the Fey cube, is the arbiter of the Fey cube. You can mod it, or the horror cube, or the almost legendary cube, right? Change it, make it work for what you want it to do. That's important to say. One of the things that trickled through, and he kind of just jumped over it like a speed bump, was Jitte, right?
Yeah.
Jitte was in there because the previous curator liked Jitte. Nathan smiles because Nathan likes Jitte. We talked about the Jitte incident in an episode. We lost our minds.
You did.
It 3-0'd the table with doing nothing but putting it on a Savannah Lion type of card. Not a legendary. We'll call it like a Ishimaru type style.
Right.
But cards like that, these are the residual kind of cuts that you find through the playtesting. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I mean, first it was hard to cut, but then when I saw it just destroyed the table. And, the other thing is that, as much as we want to get a full run of 8 people to play these cubes or more, a lot of times we end up with 4 or 5. So some of these cards never went around. So if they don't go around, we don't really get a chance to test them. And then when they finally do come out and everybody sees them, they go, oh, this is the obvious one. You need to remove this.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody kept coming up to me right afterwards. It's like, yeah, you need to move this. You need to remove this now. And
you see like, somebody when they're doing the draft and they go...
Yeah,
something's wrong.
Right.
That was the Jitte effect.
Yep.
All right, so Lord of the Rings was good to you.
Was very good, yeah.
It was the primo set for you.
Absolutely.
So I've got some cards, and these are not all exclusively Lord of the Rings, but there's one in particular that I found very interesting that you added this cube, and it's that very first one to put this in perspective. These are the cards that I think are great, and I want to see if I can get you to talk about this one, and I think there's a little bit of debate here that May and I can have with you, I believe.
Talking about flowering of the white tree. Mm-hmm. Beautiful enchantment. The first time I saw it, I was like going right in that cube. Just finished designing it when this came out, and I said, this is the perfect anthem. So it's 2 white, legendary enchantment. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+1 and have ward 1. Non-legendary creatures you control get +1/+1. So this allowed for the go wide to go very wide, and it gives an unholy strength to all creatures. So very strong. Plus the ward is not something to sneeze at. Even a ward 1 means they have to spend a little bit more to get rid of it. So I loved this card when it came out. I actually haven't gotten to play with it since it came out, to be honest with you. It hasn't popped into I haven't gotten it as a one that's handed to me.
Because I secretly cut it every time I see it and put it in the burn pile.
It's like, nope.
Yeah, this card is great. I may have, from a design perspective, when your entire cube is legendary, you can see, May, I want your opinion on this one. When I first saw this and he added it, I was shaking my head slowly, because this is a very one-sided anthem, in my opinion. But after thinking about it more and mulling over it, and he's balanced the cube out, I feel like it's got a better stance. What is your thoughts on something that explicitly plays into the cube at such a high level? Do you see anything problematic with this? I want your honest opinion, May.
So it's always tricky to determine whether or not you're going too hard into what your cube's gimmick is and making things that are really strong in your environment when they shouldn't be. I'll have a very specific example. There was the Typal Cube, and what was it called? Changeling Cube? I think it was called Changeling Cube, where basically all of your cards have Changeling. So there was this card called Aki Hermit, I think it was. Basically, it's the one where it's like, anytime that you would cast an Arcane or a Spirit card, then you would deal damage to your opponent.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's a red card.
That's pretty gross with Changeling.
It was super gross. It created a lot of problems because it leaned so heavily into, hey, the gimmick is that everything has Changeling, therefore all of my payoffs are now really, really good and always active. Right. And sometimes it's really, really good, and sometimes it's just, yep, it gets +1/+1 counters.
Yep.
My main concern when I'm looking at this in the context of your cube is that it's basically a double pip wipe to make your board just innumerable amount of damage for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I can see that
terrifying.
Challenge.
But when it comes to playing a mostly white deck, you only have like 7 creatures that are 1 or less in specifically white. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to be getting a huge board super early in the game. So while it is very strong, I don't think that it's at a position that it's going to be oppressive just because the density is not quite there for an early game. But
I don't think it's oppressive.
That's just my early estimation without actually playing it. So.
I think it's bad when it lands, but I don't think it's hard to evaluate, right? Because it's literally kind of like using the same spectrum you talked about with the Changeling type of idea, right? It is checking every card he has. The assumption is as he said, and I pre-gamed with Nathan and told him there's gonna be, this is an interview, but there's gonna be a little bit of like we're gonna have to challenge some stuff, right? This is what we do. It's not meant to come at you, but it's meant to have an open dialogue about the idea. Absolutely. But the assumption and a word that I heard you say is it really helps like the token decks.
It does. It does.
It also. My point is, how does it not help every other deck that splashes double white?
It's true. It works for anything that has legends in it, which is everything.
Everything.
It's like
I don't.
All right. So it's very similar to like a Glorious Anthem. Now, with Glorious Anthem, it's going to give all creatures you control +1/+1, but it is 1 more. So it's just not as strong. It's not as broken, but it does affect everything that you have, giving them all +1/+1. +2/+1 is a huge difference for 2.
It's huge.
It is a huge difference that you don't have to pay as much. I mean, I definitely get that that should be on a watch list. And I do watch these sort of things and try to see, okay, like what happens? Did somebody really break this card? I do have a lot of enchantment removal, and I try to focus on exile as opposed to destroy. because there's always ways to get things back. And so I just said, okay, you know what? I'm going to make a lot of stuff.
Context. Your cube also has Arvad the Cursed, which is 3 white black for a 3/3 death touch lifelink creature. Of the legendary creatures you control, get +2/+2.
+2/+2.
You're paying
exactly.
5 for the +2/+2
Right,
effect.
right.
Or you could just pay 2 white to
Exactly.
get +2/+1 and ward.
So I put this on the list for a reason, as you can see, because it's the whole point of this is not to call out Nathan in this. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is get that point of view that he said initially. This is for this archetype. We've talked about it a lot of times where I do that too, where I go, I'm adding Rancor, and Rancor is there to help werewolves because it's green. And then I see somebody run it in a mono blue deck, and I'm like, and they splashed it. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. It's green.
That's what I did that for.
Yeah, that's not what I designed that for. What are you doing? So I think it's important to think about these. May's really good at this. Don't look at the cards in a linear fashion for what the archetype you intend for it to be. Think about all the aspects that you got to get yourself out of the curator mind sometimes and go into the player mind.
Right.
I'm telling you that with your mana base, it's really powerful. And we're going to have other conversations about this. Double white is something I'm willing to go for.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really good.
Yep. So we're going to move on. But I think that's a good tie off. That's a good point to make when you're looking at cards for your cube is don't look at them one dimensionally. I guess that's the takeaway here, right? It's easy to do. It's for this. No, it's for whatever the player chooses for it to be for. And that's hard to see sometimes. The next card I think is great. I'm in love with what you've done here. I think you found a card, and it showed up in Powered Vintage list too, by the way. Is Tails In for 1 colorless and 1 blue. You get an instant counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or legendary spell.
Yep.
I think that's really powerful. But it's really good.
Yeah, I mean it's a remove soul most of the time. But
I would agree
the
with that.
ability to counter an activated ability or triggered ability, I mean there's so many. Just on creatures, on planeswalkers, on anything that has those. And I've, even as a commander player, I've found the need to have some way to counter those activated abilities, because sometimes you can counter a spell all day long, but some ability could really, end the game for you, like any land abilities, things like that.
So I think this is fair. I see zero issues. Do you see anything that flags for you with this list? I think, this is serviceable, and it kind of meets the expectation.
Yeah, I mean, getting a stifle with something that can also act as an essence scatter basically most of the time is just a generically good card. And I think that it is the opposite example compared to Flowering of the White Tree.
Right.
Where this leans heavily into your themes of, oh, hey, this is legendary cube. So that kind of subtext of, hey, I could sometimes counter a legendary spell now just becomes, this is basically a counter spell that you can sometimes use to stifle things. And now
you can counter Flowering with the White Tree
in this environment.
Yeah, you can in fact do that. You heard what he said here. You can use it to counter the Flowering of the White Tree. Dies to removal.
Yes, it's that same argument, right?
It's the same argument. It never wins. This next card, though, you ready for what's about to happen next?
Oh, I know.
This card here is...
I remember you complaining about this card.
Yeah, and this card would normally not be so great. Would you mind reading this card? And I think you might get a little chewy here.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
It's
chewy, so I thought I'd try. Crown of Gondor. Legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. So very simple. There's a lot of equipment like this. When a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, if there's no monarch, you become the monarch. Equip 4. This ability costs 3 colorless less to activate if you're the monarch.
Okay, so I want to reread this card one more time. Let's make this a lot simpler. Cost 3, equip 1, you become the monarch.
Yeah. Yeah.
All you gotta do is play your cube.
Yep.
You still sticking your guns
on that is basically gravy. But the fact that you can just, hey, a legendary creature entered, I'm now the monarch.
I played your cube. I'm the monarch.
Is really good rate.
But it is important to
whether or
note
not that's going to be problematic for your environment, considering things that already exist in here, like flowering and whatnot. I don't think that it's going to be problematic for the types of things that it's competing against. It's more of an attrition-based victory rather than a power-out victory.
Right. Well, and the thing that's important about this one is it says if there is no monarch. So if we've played it, the monarch has come into play, somebody else gets it, this doesn't give it back to me. That just means you, like that very first time, it brings the monarch into the game. And, Monarch is a fun ability in Commander. And I think, it's something that we can really use as another draw ability, because drawing cards is so important in Magic. And I used to not, I'm getting a shaking head from Anthony right now. But just drawing cards is so important. And I think, I honestly think it's fine. If we're seeing things like flowering,
I see this in the same category as flowering.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave that one for audience participation. I'm going to move on. This card
I'm not
is
saying that
busted.
It's not a good card. It's a fantastic card.
It is
but
a busted
when it's punching
card.
at the same grade as some other powerful cards that are showing up on this list.
Yeah, I made this list because I cherry picked these, but yeah, there may be a little bit of Regency bias on my part as I'm looking at the list. I'm like, pack one, pick one, pack one, pick one, pack one.
And it's colorless.
And it's colorless, so it can't go in any deck except for Eldrazi.
So the next one I'm actually going to fight Anthony on for being on here, and it's Heroes Podium. And each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other legendary creature you control. Fantastic, super powerful. Pay X, tap, look at the top X cards of your library. You may reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest into the bottom of your library in any order. It does not give keywords. It just makes your things bigger.
Yep.
And unlike flowering, it requires you to have creatures. I just don't think that the cards... It's serviceable in here.
I think it's fine.
But if I see flowering and this in the same pack, I'm taking flowering.
I'm taking flowering.
Yeah.
I'm actually taking Crown of Condor. I'm just going to draw more cards and win.
5 mana is a lot of mana for it. It may be a lot of potential damage. It definitely has a higher ceiling, but when you look at Quadrant Theory and just like, when is this going to actually be useful? It kind of is a 5 mana do nothing if you don't have a lot of things, versus flowering is just, hey, whatever creature I play, it's now +2/+1 and ward 1.
Yeah, it's kind of like that changeling that buffs your entire army, the mono white one. That's kind of what I'm thinking of, right?
Case where it's easy to get caught up in what the gimmick is and just wanting to throw everything that matches that gimmick in order to maximize what your cube is doing. So while I don't think that this is a quote-unquote bad card, it's basically like a colorless overrun without the trample. So. Yeah.
I think it's cool. Like, I actually put this one here because I thought it was neat, and I wanted to find a home. Card. I think it's very cool. I think it's thematic. I think his cube's mostly creature based. That's kind of the feedback that we kind of went after the original iteration, the original clone, right? We wanted to add some dynamics. These are the type of cards where the group he was receptive to it. It was a giant group. It was originally me, and but then we kind of splintered off from that and it became like this huge group think, and people suggested this, and it came from the list, and I think it's great. I think this is a great choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a conditional coat of arms. I mean, there are ways to make lots of tokens in this deck, but they're not legendary tokens, so they're not going to get the bonus. It's only going to be what your army is that you put out. And we'll kind of go into the next card because this is another one of my non-legendaries.
Yeah, go ahead. This is actually exemplifies what you were talking about before, and I want to put a little pin right here. Originally, when he built this cube, it was interesting to see. It's kind of like when let's say you made the Changeling cube and you just followed the context of everything has to say the word Changeling, which I know that's nonsensical. Or I built an artifact cube and everything has to be an artifact. Or Christian built an enchantment cube and everything has to be an enchantment of some sort. It definitely falls on its face because it doesn't become balanced. So this is...
You need gravy cards.
This was the first card that I think broke the chain. A little Stevie Nicks there. But this is the one that broke it here. Because when this came out, he was having this mental tug-of-war of, am I going to finally stop using the word legend? Can you tell us about that?
The card is Delighted Halfling. It's 1 green. Again, we're going into Lord of the Rings. For a creature, halfling citizen, taps for 1 colorless. So just basically it's good. Tap for 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell. And that spell can't be countered. Very important for the deck. And I was like, I was debating with Anthony for a while. I was like, I don't want to put any non-legendaries in here. But it was so strong. And it just really kind of, it changed the idea of legendary to almost legendary. This card in particular was one of the ones that I said, I think it has to happen. It's so strong and it's going to be a first pick a lot. So
I think it added like a level of dynamics. This was your first foray into cube.
Yep.
Really. I mean, you talked about the enchant, but this is the first one you paper built. You started doing the thing. And it was hard to get out of that box that you were in my opinion, right? Observing, we're watching together as friends and we're talking about this, and he was boxed in, painting himself into a corner with, it has to always say legend. So the play was becoming haymaker linear. That's what was happening. That was the resultant. By doing this card being the very first one, it opened up, in my mind, a whole new layer for you. Like you layered at that point.
Absolutely.
You start thinking about depth. May?
Yeah, so I really like this card, but my only concern with it is just, hey, no more counter spells. Interaction? What's that? I'm allergic to interaction. But, like, on the other side, it could also just die to a bolt, so...
Dies to removal. Always a great
Dies
argument.
to
Wins every
removal,
time.
The classic argument.
You know, for creatures...
But the point is that when it comes to how powerful this is, of course it's going to be a pack one, pick one. And I think that it's a perfect card that represents what the cube is, what the cube represents and trying to do, without really breaking that theme in a very direct way. And sometimes we just kind of create our own boundaries in a way that is kind of nonsensical in hindsight.
Right.
But I'm glad that you added this card, and I think that your players are going to appreciate it.
We do. It was the first one that broke that shell. That's what makes this card so momentous here. It was the one card that made him start thinking in layers. And the minute...
The fact that it's chosen over Birds of Paradise, because... Don't get me wrong, I believe that there's a lot of cubes that just need their generic gravy cards just so that way the cube can function. But the fact that you don't have a ton of 1-mana green dorks anyways, like you have just the Lighted Halfling, it looks like, and Wildgrowth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
So the point is that of those
there?
two cards that you use for 1-mana ramp,
yeah, it's pretty limited. Like it's
very limited.
It's different. You have to really lean into the rocks and stuff. That's my observation as a player. Like you really have to, and that's okay. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
Like Green's identity is definitely unique in here. It's not the ramp identity, and I think that that's a perfectly fine mold to break too, right? Like this, this cube is very interesting, and as it has grown, it's become very dynamic. In my opinion, it's become one of my favorite cubes because it's not so haymakery. That's the word I just made. I'm coining that haymakery. Like, yeah. So if anybody like has a bakery named Haymakery, I'm sorry, but I'm LLC in that now.
Well, they don't now, but
So one thing I do find interesting though about your green section is because you only have Delighted Halfling as your major creature form of ramp and like Wildgrowth as the other 1-mana ramp. You have a ton of 3-drops. But you have basically no 2-drops. You have just a Jarael of the... I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I'm going to butcher it. The Monbuli Recluse.
Yeah.
As one of your 1-2-drop in green. Right. And I think that is an interesting curve. Kind of your curveball off-script question, because that's what I do, is what was your reasoning behind having so few 2-drops in green?
You know, to be honest with you, I didn't find a lot of legendary 2-drops that I really liked. You know, there's some very, and just something that would fit into the different archetypes that I had. I'd created these 10 archetypes. I used the original archetypes that were in his original and kind of just fleshed those out. And there wasn't really anything at the 2 mana value that I just felt fit. And so far I haven't had, people haven't complained about like, hey, I can't get something out on turn 2. And that's a good observation. I mean, I definitely have 2-drops, but not in green. And, we can't really, you can't always ramp in if you only have 2 or 3 ramp spells in there.
Right.
But yeah, it wasn't really done intentionally. I just didn't find anything that I was like, oh, this fits into this. I mean, there's sets coming out every single couple of weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised if something does get into that spot in the near future.
The reason why you don't need 2, May, is because of this next card. Mox Amber, for a 0, you get a legendary artifact. Normally not a great card, right? But tap, add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. So that's how you jump right into 3. For free.
What a powerful card.
Holy guacamole.
That is just straight up power in this
This
environment.
is a soul ring.
But it's important to note, you have to have a legendary permanent out. Now, this whole thing is legendary permanents.
So difficult.
I know you're saying it's real easy, but the early plays, you think of Mox Amber and you go, okay, well, Soul Ring, I'm going to play it. So what, Yoshimaru is 1? I'm trying to think of other ones that cost 1 that get out that would be like, oh, I'm going to get into this Mox Amber real quickly. A lot of them are later. Yeah.
I will note that if you have it with Ashnod and Dark Ritual, then you can get some really spooky turn 2 plays. Because essentially you can go, in an ideal hand,
Right.
you go turn 1 Ashnod, turn 2 Dark Ritual, and Mox into Braid's Cabal minion.
Yep. Thank you, May, for affirming me.
That is a line of play that exists in this environment.
It does.
And I
it
just
does.
figured
I haven't
that.
seen it.
And yes, I know that a lot of things have to go right in order for that to happen.
Magical Christmas land.
It is
I don't know
a
if it's so
possibility.
magical. All right, so we're going to move over to our EDH brain segment. Here we go. This is your host, Anthony Adams, and we're going to have a little philosophical debate. Then I have, before the audience, and we've pre-gamed about this, so we're not bushwhacking Nathan on this conversation. This conversation's come up about 16 times, and I haven't won yet, but I'm going to do it again. So Nathan kind of just speed bumped over. He likes big old splashy plays.
I do.
And one of the original arguments before I knew this other card existed was he was including Berserk. And I was like, why are you running Berserk? He's like, I like big splashy plays. I'm like, what does that have to do? My point was, what does that have to do with legendaries? Like, the minute we unlocked the floodgates, the EDH brain came online. He's like, I like Berserk. Right. I like just running somebody over. And the argument, one of the arguments you had with Berserk, and I don't want to harp on that too much, we've talked about this before, was, well, it's also a removal spell. And my head turned inside out when you said that, but because you're never going to cast that on your opponent, and I don't know why you would. But Berserk, for who's not familiar, is for 1 green, you get an instant until the end of the turn, target creatures' current power doubles, or their power doubles. I got to do all this old. He's got the old art in here.
Artwork, yeah. And
it attacks target creature is destroyed at the end of the turn. Basically, it makes a giant monster that doubles its power, and it gets through and it whacks you. Right? That's and I'm okay that we have moved on past Berserk. Berserk, I have digested, I have processed, and it's still there. And Nathan loves it, and I gave up that fight. But recently, here we go.
Yep.
Here's the real question.
Yep.
A conversation from about, I don't know, 9 of your friends. I am representing the group as the appointed speaker. Is Mana Drain is in this cube, May? Mana Drain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful card.
It's powerful.
It's powerful.
It's extremely powerful. Nathan, so for those that aren't familiar, Mana Drain, pay 2 blue, counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add X, it says colorless, to your mana pool, where X is the casting cost of a target spell. This is old text too, so I'm probably screwing this up hard. I'm not looking at the errata. But would you mind explaining your logic for Mana Drain in your almost legendary cube?
Okay. So much like Berserk, I put these in the same place. I like the idea of somebody being able, they're getting ready, they're almost going to win, and then somebody counters their spell. I was not a huge fan of counter spells for a long time, but now I kind of realize that they kind of are important to just stop these things from running you over. Now, in my cube, there are big creatures. And, the idea is like, oh man, I could Mana Drain for 6 or 7 or 8. Yes and no. There's a lot of reanimate in the deck, in the cube. There's a lot of reanimate. There's a lot of cheating creatures into play. So you're not really getting those really big spells that you're going to get to cast for a while. Now, yes, you could cast a 6 mana. You could cast 7 mana. And 7 colorless in 1 turn is amazing if you have something you can do with it. And the idea is, there probably is. There probably is some things you could do with it. But I've found a lot of times Mana Drain is just another counterspell. The best counterspell, by the way. But I liked having the idea, this is an epic card. You see Mana Drain, you're like, oh yeah, I want to snatch that up. And that was what we were talking about earlier, that people would splash it. I said it was 2 blue, so, not as easy to splash, but, he said, well, you've got triomes in there, you've got shocks, you've got, duels and fetches. You're going to get to that 2 blue if you want it. So he had said that this breaks everything because it's going to be something that people are going to pick as their first pick every time. It's a great card. And I obviously, if I saw it in my pack, I would take it as well. But I just like the idea of just saying, okay, well, you were just about to win and I countered your spell. And I took that mana that you were going to use and I was able to use that towards my win. It might be a feel bad card. We'll see how that goes.
It is. But this is my wish. I'm taking it back because he used all of my pregame argument against me just now. So here's my argument for the audience. Okay, so the original content or the subject matter to this particular we got these. I love Nathan to death. This is what we did. Stu, if Stu was in here right now, he'd be behind him flicking his ears. But the card itself, Nathan was looking at it from the playfield perspective, which there's a whole argument to be made there as far as mana drain on the field. I want to cast one of his Niv Mizzets, and I want to do my big splashy play for 6. I think it's 6, right? Whatever.
Is 6 for Niv.
And or, do you have Perun here?
No, I don't think so.
Well, it's a lot of mana. So I've double blued, I've double red, I've done everything you've told me to do, and then you mana drain for 2. And now that's not the big win game. That's me trying to play your cube. That was my first point.
Right.
But my actual point to cards like this, and Sam Black has addressed this in articles that he's written, and I am guilty of this as well. When you put cards in an environment during the draft, it's kind of, May has said it over and over again, you can lead a horse to water kind of thing. You've talked about that, right? You've created bias, but you've also taken away agency is the word I'm looking from your drafters inadvertently by putting such a powerful mechanism in the draft. You've made it so they won't choose the other cards. That is my argument. I am guilty of doing this myself, just not to the mana drain, Jitte level, Soul Ring level, but it is a fair thing. So like if I mix into the pack, so if you put like Preordain in a pack and you had Divination in there too, you've taken away agency whether you intended for that or not, right?
Okay.
That's my one point. It's not so much the battlefield play, it's more of the impact of the draft. When this card's going around the table, someone's going to take it, and by bias, in my opinion, May, you tell me if I'm off base here, I think you've basically turned off 14 other cards.
Yeah, if you have the choice between Ponder and Divination, you're going to take the Ponder almost every time.
Whether you want to or not.
I do agree that when you put in powerful cards as an outlier, that it tends to devalue the rest of the things in that pack. I have a similar problem in the Fate Cube because I have Once Upon a Time. I'm not getting rid of Once Upon a Time. It's perfect flavor. It's not a game-winning-esque card in my environment, and the likelihood of you actually opening it is just statistically so low that it's just not an issue. But that doesn't mean that I'm not aware that it is a power outlier, and when it shows up in a pack, it just immediately devalues whatever the rest is in the pack. But I would dare to argue that Mana Drain's big problem is that you have a lot of mana dumps. You have a lot of creatures that you could just be like, all right, here's my unicorn, I'm going to dump 3 mana into it to flicker something.
Right.
And I countered your 6 mana card, I get to flicker 2 things.
That's fair. Yeah.
I just now got a ton of value out of that. Or that one Hydra where it's just like, yes, now I get a deal, like, let's say you just countered something that costs 3, right? Great, I just get to deal 3 damage to anything divided as I choose.
Yep.
For free.
Yeah. So
it is a powerful card in this environment, and whether or not that is something that you are looking for when it comes to that kind of a powerful outlier, especially when we're comparing it to, say, Mox Amber and Dark Ritual and whatnot.
Right. I was going to say, what about cards like Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile? You know, you put a lot of mana investment into a card, large creature, it comes out, it gets Path to Exile.
That doesn't give you mana back, though.
That doesn't give you mana back.
Give you mana back.
Doesn't give you anything back. It's a 1-for-1 swap. That's true. And it gives them a benefit.
Gives them benefit.
Theirs are not in the same spectrum, although they're powerful.
Not in the same spectrum.
I get the differential. But you're doing the calculus, the differential between the mana cost. I pay 7.
Right.
I pay 1. That's definitely a point of evaluation, in my opinion. Always should be like a concern if you don't flood that. But if you've got 2 of those out of 360 and you scale up, because Stu's talked about this all the time about balancing your removal, right? If your removal scales up, you're fine.
I'm actually going to take the opposite approach of Anthony, and I'm going to say lean into it. You have a lot of powerful cards and a lot of these powerful outliers, and I say lean into it. One of the things that I was looking at when you have Berserk is the fact that your cube doesn't have Skitherix, Skittles.
Oh, yeah.
The Infect Dragon.
Infect Dragon, yep.
But the original cube does.
It does.
And I do find that particularly interesting when you included Berserk, because when I think of cards like Berserk, I think Infect.
Right.
I think things that are you're trying to slam down and just instantly close the game with it. And it's interesting that it's included, but not a card like Skittles, just as an example.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I think our play group in particular was not a big fan of Infect.
I'm fine with it.
And, well, you are. But there are definitely members of our team that aren't. And Skithrix, or Skittles as we love to call him, is a great card. I mean, it's a 4/4 flying haste, or potentially haste.
Flying. It does not have haste.
It does, but you can give it haste.
You could.
You can
spend an extra black for give it haste. So yeah, I mean, 8 infect in a single turn would be insane.
The problem with that card is you require 2 cards to do that. Where it gets into going to use that for when you have to lean into it now, because that card just being your only poison card in the whole cube,
right,
means nothing. And now you need Berserk for it to mean something, or one of these overrun effects that you have.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just a standalone card that it's conditional. It's conditional at that point. So I see the idea. You'd have to actually support kind of proliferation or something to make that have external value, in my opinion. That one card
have
would
fun
never...
ideas.
Yeah.
And I say lean into them.
Yeah.
Follow the fun.
Yeah.
And the answer is that
I want to be fun.
your group doesn't end up liking those ideas, or you can lead a horse to water and they don't drink, then you could just take it back out.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. Keep slamming those weird cards like Berserk, and keep slamming the really good ones like Mana Drain, and then just kind of, adjust the other card keys around it. What?
She's on my side.
Put Jitte back in too. It's
Embrace
awesome.
There is no wrong way to do a cube.
There's
only questionable decisions afterwards.
I don't know. All right, so thanks, May.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for fueling that. All right.
You're welcome.
May's like, I'm never going to play this cube. Add everything. Put soul rings in there. You probably should run one of those.
I decided to just throw power in there just for fun.
It's going to be great. All right.
I mean, I'm not against the idea of it just being a pseudo power cube.
Right.
Where it's not actually power, it's fake power.
All right, so I can't let this go. So this is what happens with this type of cube when you start doing too much of this. It's not synergy, it becomes haymakers.
Right.
This is right where you were coming from. The cube stops having like layers and depth when it starts becoming this one card wins the game. That's all. That's so linear, right? I mean, that was Berserk. He loves Berserk. I gave up the fight a long time ago. I don't want to harp on that anymore.
Right.
But when you start adding back cards that are leaning into that too much, you start getting these creature turn sideways, linear, static gameplay. It's repetitive.
Right.
I'm in the boat that there's just a lot of other powerful things that are happening, and instead of trying to even out the curve, just embrace the more powerful part of it. There is just reassess your goals. Because now that a lot of...
Before we finish it, I just want to say one last thing regarding the Jitte problem. Jitte, it won a ton of games. It basically was what destroyed that particular game. Like, whoever had it won. I don't see this as that kind of card. I really don't see Mana Drain as that kind of card.
It's not.
So
it's just more residual. In my opinion, debate team is over.
That's fair.
But like, it's commander-centric way of thinking where you can just splash in any old card and say, this is fun.
Right.
Because you got to think about all the outcomes, right? It doesn't... Going back to Jitte, the people that were telling you not to put Jitte in there knew not to put Jitte in there before we played Jitte, and it ruined games.
Right.
And then Jitte ruined games.
Right.
Because we knew Jitte would ruin games.
Yep.
But you needed to see Jitte. But you needed to see Jitte ruin games before you processed it.
Well, I mean, it may be
also
simply.
I'll fight you. We should keep this part.
I will.
For that little that moment where somebody gets countered. If I get countered and I'm doing something, I mean, I might get salty about it and be like, you know what? Screw this card. I'm getting it out of here. But like, I might also be like, good play. That was a good play. You won. Good job.
You do the same thing with cancel.
Cancel?
The same thing without getting a mana swerve that just totally off tilts the game. This has become the Mana Drain episode.
I don't think cancel is
it's a bad example.
Awful card.
You could do miscalculation. You could do mana leak. You can do any of these things, and it'll do something in a much more appropriate.
Mana leak is
lose focus. Anything that requires a little bit of lose focus is a great card. That requires they must invest to make it cost more. Mm-hmm. That's fair. And they didn't get an outcome. That goes back to your original Path to Exile statement, sort of. It's not they don't get the mana, hey, I canceled your 7-drop. Ha ha ha. Now I've got 7. Now I'm going to sink it and win the game. That's, I guess. All right, we're moving on.
Okay.
Moving on, people. Moving on. This debate will continue at some point off the record.
Oh, The neat thing about how your cube is set up, you went straight into the archetypes for your overview, but there's not really any text about like how it's played, how it's drafted,
I need to
etc.
on
You
that
just
too.
went
I need
straight
to
into
fix
It's in
that.
progress.
this is what you're going to be expecting from these certain color pairs, and I kind of appreciate that, where it kind of gives that nice little preview.
That's in progress. He recently
Yeah.
just built this TLDR. It's
Yeah.
in preparation for the event.
Yep.
This was a new idea. We cloned an idea. I gave him the script for it. Now he's copy pasting and filling it out.
Exactly.
It's in progress.
And I didn't know where to add text. Now I can see it together. I can add text and make it more appropriate.
This is a pardon or dust
But it's
situation.
fun. It is fun to kind of just have the cards there and have people see what they do and how they fit the theme.
So let's talk about your themes. And what we'll do is for expediting the episode, we'll one touch each one of them that represents the archetype.
Okay.
And so you have a blink package in here, and I think it's fantastic. And the card that you have in there, which I do enjoy very much, and I think it's great, is Brago, the King Eternal. For 2 colorless and Azorius, get a legendary creature Spirit. Flying. When Brago, King Eternal, deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under your control for a 2/4 flyer. I think that's great. I think that's a great... It's not even a signpost. Like, that literally just thumped you in the forehead and said, hey, I like Blink. But this card's fun. It's more fun, I think, in this environment than, say, Commander, where it can be miserable.
Right.
You can do interesting stuff. I think this is a great way to... Blink is dynamic. Blink has some intrinsic problems. Like, as a curator that runs Blink in my FemCube, I'll be the first one to tell you, even when I played it in Commander, Blink does just destroy interaction. Like, it does by what it does, like with cards of, like, Ephemerate and all that.
Yep, Ephemerate.
But it's also like really dynamic and interesting and complex and does things and makes you, it kind of influences your draft decisions. You look at ETBs and LTBs and all these things. So it makes your brain kind of go burr, as May says. I'm catching on the lingo here. I'm getting there, May. I'm getting there. But what do you think about Brago?
I'm sorry, I'm a generation before you.
You got me covered. I think Brago's great.
For the interest of time, we'll continue the theme of just one card, but next you have like Boros equipment. And I actually don't think that Mary Esquire and of Rohan is quite an equipment commander. Like, yes, sure, it gets first strike for being equipped, and that's neat. But at the end of the day, you're using it as a draw engine for your legendary cards, which you're basically always getting.
Right.
Versus Kellen. Kellen is much more of the representative of Boros, search for the specific equipment that you want, and then the front half is whereas other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen. See, that's cool.
It is fun. And like, I mean, with Mary, he, again, another one of the legends from Lord of the Rings. And I just love the idea that, like, again, attacking with Mary and another legendary creature, draw a card. And that's the main thing that's in there. But, if it gets equipped, it also gets first strike. It's just a nice little additional piece that it makes it that much better.
Look, it's just a card that I lean into the examples of. It feels like it's a good card.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that you're mostly legendaries. Every time you attack with it in another creature, draw a card. That's good value.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about, this subgroup, is I like it. It's uber powerful, is your Reanimator package, which is going to be Dimir. And you've got stuff in here like Emrakul Promised End and what's that? How you
Grizzlebrand?
Grizdaddy.
Yeah, having Reanimate and Grizzlebrand in the same environment screams powerful.
Yep, sure does.
Powerful.
Sure does.
Yeah, there's some. This cube's still
all
big.
I'm saying
is
that if you're gonna have Mox's Monodrain and Reanimate and Grizzlebrand,
I strongly disagree. I think there's some balancing situations that need to. You've got outliers. I think Grizzlebrand. I like that card. My powered vintage environment is pretty great there.
Right.
You're running a lot of the same.
Figure out how powerful you're wanting your gimmick to be.
Once Grizzlebrand comes down, you're done. I mean, you got to have. If you're about to tell me, well, you've got a path to exile.
No, I was going to say I love Reanimator. Reanimator is one of my favorite archetypes. And the idea of, it's kind of a glass cannon. I mean, yes, you're throwing things in your graveyard, Somebody could exile your graveyard. Somebody, could destroy the enchantment as soon as you put it on a creature. But somebody could counter the spell that you're using. And I'm not saying like that is not powerful. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, to be able to play an Emrakul, the Promised End, super strong card. It's going to stay in your graveyard, unlike the other one that shuffles in every time.
Neon's Torn.
Neon's Torn, yeah. I mean, and there's definitely a sneak attack in here as well to plop it into play that way.
Yeah.
It's just, those are epic plays. Those are what I talked about before. These giant things that, I was doing fine until he sneak attacked Emrakul and Griselbrand, and then I just died.
So there's never been an episode, I wish we had like live feed, that I've made more pucker faces in an episode where I'm turning my face inside out and like, yeah, okay. All right, we're moving on.
I will note it's just because different curators have different goals, and sometimes reassessing what the person's trying to accomplish rather than just the environment that you're trying to jump into. I do think that your player feedback is very important, and definitely listen to what your players are doing.
That's what I was going to say.
Making sure that people actually want to actively play your cube is important. So
of course.
Looking at these power outliers is definitely a consideration moving forward, but that doesn't
you said
mean
everything
that
I was going to say.
See the reasoning why you made those decisions.
Yeah. This next one actually I love. Okay, we're going to get to one I'm like, all right. The cards he's put in here for his Golgari section, it's his +1/+1 counter scheme. This is spice. Okay, now you got my attention. Now we're playing a legendary cube.
Yeah.
I dig what you did here. Would you mind taking on this card that you have representing that? I think that's great.
Absolutely. So Pulchronos Unchained. 2 colorless, 1 black, and 1 green, or Golgari. Legendary creature, Zombie Hydra. Pulchronos enters the battlefield with 6 +1/+1 counters on it. It escapes with 12 +1/+1 counters on it instead. If damage would be dealt to Pulchronos while it has a +1/+1 counter, prevent that damage and remove that many +1/+1 counters from it. You can also spend 1 colorless, 1 black, and 1 green to fight another creature. So you can bring it into play and just kill something else if you want to.
Spice.
Yeah. And then the escape cost is 4 colorless, 1 black, 1 green. Exile 6 other cards from your graveyard. And then it's a 12/12.
That's all.
That's all.
I think this card's great. Like, for me, this is the legendary, and we're going to follow up with another one. These cards is what I'm looking at, right? These are the commanders that were never really accentuated, right? There's a reason why I'm going to use commander, because that's where a lot of your design aspects
that's where it came from.
Where's Griselbrand banned at?
Commander.
Okay, we're going to end that right there. All right, so Pulchronos is awesome. Like, this is a fantastic choice. I'm going to go ahead and do one more here, because I think this is where I'm seeing kind of the ship turning, that I really like this one. I'm at Grakma, the Skyclave Ravager. This is, again, 1 colorless and Golgari. Legendary creature, Hydra Horror. Grakma, the Skyclave Ravager, enters the battlefield with 3/1/1 counters on it. Whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a 1/1 counter on it, put a 1/1 counter on a Grakma. When Grakma dies, create an XX black and green Hydra creature token, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it, and it's a 0/0, so it gets X in it. Yeah. I love this. Like, everything about this is like screams to me like, when I look at a legendary cube, I'm looking at, I guess, not Commander All-Stars sometimes. Right. I guess that's where maybe where the disconnect, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at like, I want to play that. Like, that's awesome. Everything about this is gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, these cards aren't really great in Commander. Pulchronos Unchained and Grakma are not great in Commander, but in this environment they shine. They can, do a lot of things in a short period of time, and +1/+1 counters are fun. I mean, sometimes people don't really like putting little counters on their cards multiple times, cool. But it's decent.
So May, the reason why Berserk, got through my little my hard candy shell and how he won was actually because of this next card. Would you mind taking on the one in the Gruul section? Because again, I'm like, wow, okay, this is cool. I can do this.
So, Zatora Zilla, you always give me that.
Yeah, I do.
Of course, he's doing that just for you.
Strength Incarnate is 3 red-green for a 7/3 dinosaur with trample. Lethal damage dealt by creatures you control are determined by their power rather than their toughness.
That's cool. Like, that's cool to me. Like,
it's pretty cool.
This is grabbing on to the legendaries, or almost legendary, if you're really doing it. Like the cards that were on the outer rim of not quite being, they're kind of like they're in your sideboard. You're like, I want to build this guy, but I don't know how to build this.
What to do with it?
Yeah. There's actually one more you have on here too. I think it's great. Would you mind taking this one? I think it accentuates the idea too. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I love this card. Zofandril Hunger Dominus. 5 colors, 2 green for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror. It has reach. It is a 4/6. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until the end of turn. So your opponent's turns and your turn, you get a giant creature. All your creatures are giant. And then you can spend 2 Phyrexian mana or 2 green, sacrifice 2 other creatures, put an indestructible counter on Zofandril Hunger Dominus. So, you can give indestructible to this. So that could be problematic in the future. But again, you have to sacrifice things. There's definitely ways to get rid of it.
It doesn't have evasion. I mean, it has reach. So, I can, and it costs 7 mana. So we're going to go with and back to May's original point, your green section is not ramping into this. Not really.
Right.
Your Mox Amber is getting you there. But you're not actually, your rocks have to kind of carry you there. So by the time you've done this, I'm going to go with you've earned this. Like you've worked.
Right.
It's happening. It's gross. They can deal with it. But May, what are your thoughts on a card like that? I think this is, for me, as a player, this is probably why I lose in this cube so much. I'm like, oh my God, these cards are awesome. I want to play these cards that I've never seen in Commander, right? That's where I'm looking at. And I'm like, I'm going to play Zithara and Zafadaffodil or whatever the names are. But they're great. Zafadaffodil.
Yeah, so my big concern with your Gruul section is because you don't have a strong ramp package and you're making everything big stompy Gruul things, is that this is a case where you're leaning hard into your power cards is actually a detriment to one of your packages. Where it feels like the cool thing that you're wanting to do in Gruul actively gets punished because by the time these cards are coming out, the game's already over by the other bigger, stompier things that are coming down sooner.
Gotcha.
You're forcing it to be reanimated or cheated out, and maybe that's not what you want.
Right.
Do you run Ilarg in here?
5
okay.
Zillithora is nothing compared to reanimating a Gristlebrand. They are not even comparable on the same spectrum. And sometimes you just kind of have to reassess where you're wanting your power balance to be and then just reassess what your environment needs to be in order to support those themes. I like the idea. I think that that's something that you should lean into as a concept, but making sure that you have an environment that's not going to punish players for going into that lane is also important.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it makes a good case for putting more ramp in there for sure.
I would agree with that. Like to kind of make green great again type of thing, right? Like it's fair. It's a fair statement because it's really leading into what the other colors have access to, like mana rocks.
Right.
They need it. Green didn't need it, but it's been deprived. So it becomes like this fight for the mana rocks. Like mana rock superiority becomes a thing. I think that is a possibility. We can look at that together and I'll talk about it. But it's a fair statement. The next one's kind of and I'm going to, for the sake of time, we've got Izzet's the Spell Slinger. That's not really probably no,
it's not a Spell Slinger commander.
It's not. And that's why I'm struggling to even read it out loud. So I'm going to try to find one. We're going to go with
Dika's part.
Dika the Fractal Theorist, which is not Izzet, by the way. But it's in the list. It's in the TLDR. So here, we're working with what we got, folks. So for 5 colorless and blue, you get a legendary creature, human wizard, 3/3. Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or source spell, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put a 1/1 counter on it, where X is that spell's mana value, and then you can pay 3 colorless and 1 blue. Target creature token can't be blocked this turn. I'm going to go with that goes in your counter section, even though it's not Dimir. It's fractals and it's Simic.
Yeah, Simic isn't really that color. I mean, you'll see there's a Simic section too, but yeah, I mean, I think this is probably one of those sections that I probably need to do more work on too, to be totally honest. I have spells to cast, not a lot of creatures that care about those spells. I think
Magecraft is, regardless of Magecraft really opens up an avenue. Strixhaven, in my opinion, really opens up a lot of avenues for you as a curator.
Yeah.
Even if you're embracing that. It doesn't have to be Izzet to be a spell slinger anymore.
Right.
And there's a lot of legends. Although I don't really like the double face 2 different creatures. It's not my personal preference, but I think it would be very acceptable in this environment. I have quite a few of them. I'll be willing to Yeah,
we can take a look.
Because it gives you like a whole dynamic here, I think, in my opinion. The next section's Rakdos. It does the sacrifice. I don't know if you guys know, but Rakdos likes to sacrifice stuff. Would you agree?
It does, for sure.
In that spot, you have Judith the Scourge Diva, which is great. It's kind of a known entity. But I actually don't have both sides of this card, but a card that I'm in love with is Ayara, Widow of the Realm.
Mm-hmm.
Huge fan of this card. For 1 colorless and 2 black, get a legendary creature, Elf Noble. You can tap it, sacrifice another creature or artifact, or Ayara of the Realm deals X damage to target opponent or battle. You don't run battles in here, do you?
I do not run battles.
Battles would be kind of neat in here. I think if there was a cube that battles could be in, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of battles, but if there was a cube, battles would be neat. Gains X life, where X is the sacrifice permanent, some mana value. Then it's got pay 5. Phyrexian red, transform it into something that we can't see because I took this off of his TLDR and it's done on the other side. Which is great because I think it reanimates on the other side.
It does.
We're just going to go with it reanimates.
Yeah, it reanimates by tapping. So it's very strong. Reanimates the card for a single turn. Gives it haste. So it kind of shallow graves it.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And yeah, it's super strong.
I think it's great. I don't really have anything to add. Like, I'm a fan of this card. I think it really plays into what Rakdos does. And then Judith just kind of pings him. It's kind of an aristocrats type thing.
Right.
Which you have like a light suite of that too.
I do.
Like where legendary applies.
That's actually the next section.
Yeah. May, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. Like,
pretty
the thing
standard.
about Rakdos Sacrifice is that it's a package that's thoroughly explored and thoroughly supported.
Oh,
so
yes.
There's just not a lot for contribution here. But I do think that it is interesting where you have like Judith, which is encouraging that kind of aggressive sacrifice package, versus Ayara, which is a little bit more of that sustained value sacrifice package. So it's going to be an interesting dichotomy when people actually draft that.
Orzhov, aristocrats. Okay, yeah, same thing as the Mardu all together. We'll slap them all together. There's a lot of opportunity here, but the one card you do have is Yawgmoth.
Yep.
The Thran Physician. I'm in love with this card. I think it's great because you do, as you said, have token generation. So you have played in that. And they're not legendary tokens, as you have stated, right? Nothing makes a legendary. Is there a legendary token at all?
I don't think so. Not in here.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward, right? You're kind of just getting what you get. So I think that's cool. I think it's cool.
And Yawgmoth double dips, which is nice. It could go in sacrifice as well.
Yeah, so it kind of plays into the Selesnya package where you've got some more cards that kind of warm my heart, right? Like,
I don't know. I see your Orzhov section more as Orzhov Beatdown.
Yeah, it could be. I mean,
with Arvad on the top end and like the enchantment on the early turns, it could just push out so much damage. And then with that flip, Shali and Embrose as your legendary for Orzhov, it's just you're trying to push out a lot of damage and increase your numbers. So I could see this as sort of an Orzhov beatdown type thing.
Yeah, it might be fitting more towards that. There is an aristocrat sort of idea behind it, but I think it does sort of go wide along with the next section, which is Selesnya.
Which you've got cards in here, but I'd like for you to talk about this card because this card's awesome. And it kind of goes back to what May said about ramp, so it is a thing to consider. But tell us about this card.
So this one is Galta and Mavrin. It's 3 colorless, green, white. It's a 12/12 trample. So already 7 for a 12/12 trample is pretty amazing. Whenever you attack, choose 1. Create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur token with trample, where X is the greatest power amongst other attacking creatures. Or create X/1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of other attacking creatures. This came out of March of the Machine, and these team-ups were so much fun to add to the cube. You'll see a lot of the team-ups are in there, because you got to have a little bit of both. And I really like the idea that this can either go wide with a ton of little 1/1s, or you can have Galta and another giant dinosaur coming at you.
But I think it's great. You got to do the team-ups. Did you do, like, Multani and that grouping and all these weird...
Multani and Yargle? Absolutely.
Oh, my goodness.
Absolutely.
Yargle
Fun with Multani and Yargle together. So
I can see that. The next one, I like how you define the Simic card draw.
Yeah.
Because you're drawing cards because it's Simic.
Yeah.
So Tatiova, the Benthic Druid. That's a good magic card. It's pretty good, but it does cost 3 and Simic, but you get a legendary creature, Merfolk Druid. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and you draw a card for a 3/3. Do you have fetches in this cube?
I do.
You do?
Sure do.
I could see a use for this card.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's also not as good as it would have been in the commander environment where you're intentionally abusing this. You're playing around this card.
Right.
So it's got its kind of impact there, I guess. But this next one, would you mind reading this card? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, this is a fun one too. Lonus Cryptozoologist. We have, it just costs Simic. Whenever another non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, investigate. Tap. Sacrifice X clues. Target opponent reveals the top X cards of their library. You may put a non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield under your control. That player puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. That's a fun one. For blue and green to steal something. It's not very common.
Yeah, I think this is a great card. Like, for me, like this, going back to the TLDR, this card is the one I would put as the showboat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Tatiova's cool, but like, Lannis is what I want to lean into. These are the big plays. This is my Johnny brain going online pretty hard here. I want to do things. This is cool. May, what do you think about that card?
So, I think that it is a significantly more interesting direction to take Simic compared to a lot of the ways people have already put Simic, where it's kind of here's my Simic value package, and that's it. It draws cards, it plays lands. And especially in an environment where that's lacking so much ramp, I do think that Lonis creates more interesting and dynamic gameplay in your Simic package. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So there's something every time we have a guest on and we meet a new cube, right? I have fallen in love with the Commander's Spellbook, I think it is, and they have the Find Your combos, and we do the Mari Povich, you're not the father. Nice. Well, you are the combo because I ran your cube and I found 2 combos. And I'm going to argue these are not very difficult to assemble. So one of them is Niv Mizzet the Firemind, which likes to draw cards.
It sure does.
And the card Curiosity.
Yep.
This is not an unknown thing. That's a very Commander closeout type of thing.
Absolutely.
So I did want to put that as infinite card draw, infinite draw triggers, and near infinite. It's mostly dead damage.
Right.
Mostly. The next one, and I don't know what this card does, but I did put these in the notes, is Soulfilm the Mayhem Dominus. I have no idea what that card does. Not going to look it up. And Heartless Hijitsu. This is interesting what it says. Each opponent loses the game.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know.
So I'm looking through the list and I don't see Heartless on the list.
Did you cut it?
I did cut Heartless. Yeah. So this one was in there originally.
Old notes.
Unfortunately, I've been making a lot of changes. I actually replaced Sulfilim also with a hybrid that does the double damage as well.
Good to know. So you don't just, so for the listeners.
Yep.
Don't worry about this combo.
This combo is not in there anymore.
Okay.
The double damage is there. And yes, Curiosity Niv Mizzet. I watched it go off a few times actually recently, and I really enjoyed it. But the funniest thing was I had one player who did this combo, and the opponent had gained enough life that even though they actually milled out their deck before they could kill their opponent.
Is this the application of the near infinite damage?
Near infinite damage, exactly.
Okay, good. I just wanted asking for a friend.
Yeah.
So this cube is awesome. Like, it's fun. Like, I kind of poked at him a little bit here, back and forth. I kind of poked and prodded because we've talked about this before. Offline, we play this cube. This cube is one of my favorite cubes. It's fun. It does everything you want. It's big, splashy, kind of live the dreamish, just does everything you want as a curator. May, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate that you compensated the slower gameplay by basically stunting a lot of those early drops to make it so that way the early games are mostly about setting up and getting into those big, splashy, memorable plays. So I think that is a cool direction for your cube to go in.
I agree.
And I really appreciate talking about the fact that ramp isn't really a thing. And I think I definitely will make some changes to add that in there. Or I might shift some things to make it maybe more landfall-y. Because that landfall seems to be another sort of a hidden thing that's in kind there as well. Yeah. It's starting to emerge a little more. I might be able to make that into the Simic thing. But, we'll kind of see how it goes. But I do appreciate that you guys talk to me about those things. And I'm going to definitely consider with more ramp for green, because I do like that. I'm a fan of green. I'm actually a Gruul fan, so to have Gruul not be as strong as I want it to be is unfortunate to me. I actually I think my Discord is Gruul forever.
It is. So it's really confusing when I'm trying to find Nathan.
Yes, like, where is he? He's Gruul forever.
He's Gruul forever.
And then I have
find
the pictures.
It hard because even with the fake cube, I have to be very careful when I'm trading with goblins, and goblins are not the strongest deck in my environment, but goblins are one of my favorite.
Yeah, they're fun. Actually,
it's hard not to have bias for your thing while also making it somewhat playable. So I understand your struggle.
Yeah, and I'm struggling a lot now because I'm building another cube. It is a Ghostbusters themed cube.
Yep.
And it should be a lot of fun, but definitely going to need a lot of help on it because themed cubes, as May knows, are difficult, and difficult to get going and get that idea. So maybe that'll be something we'll talk about in the future.
Well, we certainly will. But if you want to play this cube, and I promise you probably should play this cube. This cube is fun. It's everything, like if you like Commander and you like cube, and it just all wrapped into one. Like, I love everything about what this cube does. Like, it's splashy, it does big plays, things are dynamic, but things are also like, oh man, it just cost me 1 billion mana, but I made this huge dinosaur vampire. Don't know why there's not a slash there, but here we are. You can play it at the UberCube event, which will be at the Gathering Place on April the 27th. So I will have that included in the show notes. We talked about that before. We would love for you to sign up, come out, have a good time. It's one of the cubes on the list. Nathan, thank you for coming on the show, putting up with me, like just doing the thing that you know I was going to do anyways, is asking the tough questions.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully you've gotten a lot of helpful information from this and feel like that you're walking away a happier curator.
If you're hearing babies in the background, that's because a baby has entered the room and said, "Dada." All right, so let's move over to our socials. So we're going to start out by saying thank you to our Patreons: Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nicholas Lapointe, Stephen Conifal, Preston, and Samuel McKenna. As you know, we have a really cool MTG Facebook drafting page. We're well over 800 members. So if you're looking for another avenue, another social media point where you can find UberCube, come find us on that page. If you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. Also, UberCube is an affiliate with Altersleeves. If you use our code, you get 5% off your purchase. It's altersleeves.com/UberCube.
If you want to support the show, please use our Inked Game affiliate link, Playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, etc., custom and large volume products available. You can also find us on Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also feel free to reach out to us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us in our Discord. I don't think you've ever set up the hashtag for that.
Nope, but I put it there because it's cool, but we got a real link.
Point is that you can find us on the Discord. You can find the Discord link through our Twitter.
And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is...
Wait, hang on.
Happy cubing!